a number of community members. And so I really would like to look to them, you know, as I continue to develop in my role, these partners that I have in the zone directors from Agassiz and Richland, or Agassiz and RSR, to help answer some of these questions that we have as a board. One of the important things too that I thought was interesting, and I left this on, is under the Agassiz Valley notes. They said Agassiz Valley has made a conscious effort to engage other community partners in the board meeting, so including them as regular guests, and those might be individuals from long-term care, the school, or specialty groups. And what they've done is utilize those guests to help educate and engage the board and the agency to understand, plan, advocate, and meet community needs. So I think as we talk about the composition of the board and the possibility to not only do some recruitment, it might be appropriate to have routine guests that we invite that can come and just provide education and such for the board. Could you excuse me for just one moment, please?
This is Brian. Can you hear me now?
I hear you, Brian.
Okay.
Hey, Brian. Gotcha. Maybe while she's off, this is Chad. Just to share a thought. I love the idea of having it like once every social services board meeting, having a community member come in, a partner that we work with, or even call in, doesn't matter. And give us sort of an update, a brief as to what they're up to, what they do for us, and how we can strengthen that relationship. I think that's a great idea.
Did you say community member, or did you say a department?
Community partner.
Oh, community partner. Sorry. I can't.
Yeah, other agencies you work with. I love the idea of doing that. Plus, it gets us up to speed too as board members as to what, first of all, our relationship with them, and then B, just for our general knowledge, when we're out and about in the public, we understand what these organizations do too. So I think it's nothing but good.
Yeah, I really like that idea too, especially where there's some overlap with existing community partners and human services. And, you know, in some cases, I think there's probably a great opportunity in where we butt up with other agencies, and so we fill gaps naturally. They do some things we don't do, we do some things that they don't do. But I think it would be interesting to see where there's some gaps too that exist between our community partners and us. And then I think with the redesign as an opportunity to talk about innovative solutions to fill those gaps that exist within our community. So I think that's a great idea, not only to potentially recruit members, but also then to bring community partners in and just have some ongoing training and education and how we serve the same groups and what that service looks like and how we can more comprehensively meet their needs. So I really kind of had finished the end of my summary about the zone boards. I did engage in some other activities, so I did let our existing zone board applicants know that we were just going to hold for a period of time and really figure out what the board looked like before we brought new members on. As I stated, I met with my fellow zone directors from Region 5, and they've just been a wealth of knowledge just across the board, which has been really, really nice. And then Robert and I had the opportunity to follow up with Senators Judy Lee and Kathy Hogan. And so we talked a little bit about the intent behind 2124 and talked a little bit about the board. And so they shared some good ideas just in terms of how we might potentially do recruitment and talked about the purpose of the board in an advocacy role. And so how we're I guess how our board members are again, communicating what's going on in our community and bringing it back to this board so we can talk about are there gaps in service in our community, and really helping stand behind the program changes that we might need, or the new processes, or whatever we might do in conjunction with redesign to help fill those gaps. And then I was able to have a zone meeting, and we talked a little bit about zone boards. It was a zone directors meeting, I apologize. And so I really did request to Sarah Stoltz again that the zone board training that's been put off as a result of COVID is something that this board is interested in. And that was really echoed kind of across the state from zone directors, is that there are a lot of boards who, you know, are waiting for that education, and they're looking forward to it because they want to be able to function at maximum capacity, but they kind of need to know what that looks like as well. So with that, I'll stop talking, and if anybody has comments or questions, Robert, if you have any additional feedback from our meetings, meeting with the senator, open this time up to just anybody who has anything to share.
Pearl?
Yes.
So what is the reason that they're not going forward with the board education? It seems like it's a perfect time. I'm just sitting here.
Yeah.
I can get online, and this is when I would love to be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I honestly have just kind of that general, they had so many program changes due to COVID, mobilizing state staff to go home and all of these things. It disrupted a lot of redesign processes up to and including this board training element. And so I feel like at this juncture, the state really is saying, all right, we had this disruption, it was legitimate, and so now they're starting to get back onto their feet again, and we're moving forward with some of the redesign rollouts that have been delayed due to the pandemic. So I'm hopeful that that will be coming sooner than later as well, and I'll continue to advocate for that with Sarah Stoltz, and I think the other zone directors are on the same page. So.
Pearl, this is Rick.
Yes, Rick.
So this is a question for Robert. Robert, you had texted me last week sometime about your meeting with the senators, and yeah. Pearl kind of prompted you maybe if you can add anything to that. How did they enlighten us as far as what their thoughts were?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I thought it overall was just a very good meeting. You'll recall that for commissioners who were part of the meeting, I want to say it was November, with senators, I think both Senators Lee and Hogan and Director Jones were part of that. And at that point, it was maybe a little bit of a tense meeting as we were really working through some pretty unique situations at that time. And so then fast forward to last week, and this was I got the feeling from both of them that they want to absolutely be advocates for this zone. They have obviously an invested interest in seeing that the zone structure works well, but also seeing that that this zone board is reflective of what the vision for 21-24 was, and so they gave some examples of the representation that they felt like should be represented on the board. They were, to be blunt, they felt like it's more difficult. They said in single county zones to really draw that distinction between what had been the norm of county-based social services moving to the zone concept, and where when you have a single county zone, it's much easier to essentially roll over the same group of people. Previously, it was called a county social service board. Now it's called a zone board, and so they made the point really of of listing a couple of different user groups and community groups that they felt like were needed to be represented on the board. And with this advice, feedback, if you want to say, they were very clear not to come off of we're telling you how to do things. They said that that's not not the position we're in, not where we're going, but this is the vision that we were operating, in their voice, as legislators when we set up the bill and we set up this structure. So I came away very much with the feeling that they want to see they want to see Pearl succeed. They want to see the zone succeed. They want to see the services provided in the most effective and efficient way possible, and wanted to be of service in that vein and helpful in any way they could without getting in the way. So that would be my Cliff Notes summary of the meeting, and if anybody has any specific questions off of that, I'd be happy to answer them. And I'll just follow up. I don't have notes in front of me, but I know Pearl was taking notes, and they very definitely listed specific organizations or groups that they felt they'd like to see represented on the zone.
Yeah, so they had talked about potentially a member from public health, obviously school representatives, considering that much of what we do is related to children, and schools have a bulk of our mandatory reporters. They talked about potentially having individuals from job services or other state administrative programs that we have some overlap in clientele with. And then the other interesting thing that they encouraged was maybe for us to take a look at some of our local boards that we could potentially emulate some things of. And so they had talked about even the Fargo-Cass Public Health Board, that they thought that was a really effective board. And then they talked about regional education associations, and I'm not super familiar with them, so that'll require some additional research on my part. So I thought their feedback was really helpful. I think the one thing that they talked about that was interesting is, there was all this intent that goes in behind legislation and the intent of the board and the intent of this. But sometimes when you actually write the legislation or you write the code or the rules around it, some of that intent doesn't get translated. And so that's, I think they've kind of both identified that, what exists out there in terms of the board responsibilities. And I had sent those out at our last meeting, that one-page document. That doesn't help you establish the intent of the board. And so some of that is up to us, I think, in how we interpret what's laid out for us in 21-24 and how we proceed forward in serving our community and providing human services within Cass County. Sorry. We're going to the races later, apparently. So I think that's kind of a disconnect there, is what's actually written down about it and what was the intent behind it, and then whose job is it really to say, well, this is what we intended or isn't what we intended, if they didn't really explicitly write that down in rules or code or guidance or do training or, do those things. So, Mary, did you have something?
I do. Did they talk about at all about having any consumers? I note that we did have an application from a consumer or, a foster parent or somebody that has had direct, contact with our agency. And then also I note that, obviously many of these boards are much more rural, and so you're represented geographically from different areas. Is there any conversation about having other geographic areas of Cass County represented rather than just the metro area?
Yeah, so to your first question, I think the only really comment that was made particularly about consumers, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, was there was a discouragement to have individuals with a single-minded agenda. I think that's one of them that said, so, you know, potentially if we were to bring a client or consumer on, we would want to make sure that, you know, obviously they were there to contribute to the board itself and to the delivery of human services across the county. And so how do you vet those individuals? So I think there wasn't really anything definitive. Did I miss anything on that, Robert? Was that accurate?
I was going to say essentially the same thing. They mentioned that they really would have some difficulty or heartburn with single issue board members. That just their experience in elected roles brought them to the conclusion that single issue individuals often aren't the most effective on input boards such as this, and so I would echo what you said.
Mm-hmm. And again, that wasn't dictating that they should or shouldn't be. It was just a word of caution. I think secondary to your point, I think that's a wonderful idea. You know, as we consider the representation of the board in the future, or even the guests that we invite, you know, it makes sense to have Fargo Public Schools, right? But what about all the other schools that exist outside of our metro area who encounter the same things, maybe on a different scale that Fargo Public Schools does? They still deal, you know, with mandatory reporting and with all of those similar issues. And so how do you get a perspective across this large county that we serve? And maybe that's the option in which, you know, we have some established board members, but then we continue to be really good about having guests coming in and, you know, providing training and education and feedback and talking about the issues that they face in their more rural communities outside of the, you know, Fargo metro area. So.
Well, and I guess the things that just comes up in my mind is, you know, senior services in more rural areas and access to those services. Because it's, you know, it's a big county, and you know, if you're not driving, it's pretty tough to get over here.
Yeah.
They should Uber it.
Yeah, I think just to that point, you know, we do some locally administered home and community-based services that is just operated by Cass County, and so that wasn't absorbed when the state took over home and community-based services. And so we do partner with Agassiz Valley to provide some of those hands-on services to individuals that live closer to their counties than they do to the Fargo metro area. And so that's, I think, the really neat thing about zones is that we are encouraged to participate in those types of activities and to be able to serve people despite their geographical boundaries. And so that's an existing collaboration that's in place. And so they provide some of those services, and we provide the other part of those services here. Commissioner Breitling, you're muted.
Still muted.
Now?
Nope.
Now we hear you.
I noticed that on the handout that or the printout that I have on the zone board membership throughout the state, that Cass and Burleigh counties are almost identical
They
in
are.
their composition.
Yeah, and
At the present level.
yep, they were the only single county zone that responded to my request, and I honestly just didn't dig any deeper with them. They had one additional member, it says in those notes, that had since left the area. They had relocated, and so she had just said, I don't know if we're going to replace someone or not. Be interested to see what Grand Forks and Ward County are also, you know, if they've made any adjustments, or, you know, if they're kind of rolled over their board and are, you know, going through asking some of the same questions that we are about, you know, how do we, you know, move forward in the future. So.
I have another question. It doesn't have to do with zone composition,
Sure.
but in your handout or printout, you talk about the need to have a rough draft of the human service zone plan in existence by today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there such a document?
Yeah,
Have you provided it to the board members?
I have not. So let's do we have any other questions regarding the zone board? Can we switch over to questions at this point? So what Commissioner Breitling is talking about is on the last page of the operating report. So the narrative piece are some comments that I contributed. And so there is a rough draft that is due today. So the final draft was actually due today, and then we had a pandemic, and Sarah Stoll assumed that the governor would issue an executive order that would allow us to extend our timeline on when this zone plan was due. That executive order never occurred, but there was a decision made at the state level that zone directors could give just a draft of these zone plans, and then we have the next 6 months to work in collaboratively with the state to finalize these. And so nothing would ever be finalized without board approval. And so really, I'm going to be really honest with you, I've worked on that for about a week and a half because they didn't have any training programs that they were supposed to do for like any of the follow-up meetings for zone plan development with zone directors, and myself coming in the middle of March, like I was already behind people. And so I really got together with those regional directors that I had, and they shared their zone plans with me. And so I've been filling in the gaps in ours. And a lot of it talks about, you know, what existing partnerships do you have with zones? What is your current board makeup? They want attachments like your proof of liability coverage. They want a list of your assets. And so it's an interesting document because there are parts that don't necessarily apply to Cass County because we're a single county zone. So we're not going to divide assets with anybody. So that doesn't need to be provided. And we didn't have this is how we're going to co-manage. We're going to have a host county and we're going to have multiple counties. So I'm not opposed to sharing that with anybody, and I would be happy to do it. I just figured you guys didn't want to see my really ugly draft before it was completed. And so I still have requests out from staff across the zone about like what is our indigent burial process, because I need to include that. And, you know, like I said, what's our list of assets that are greater than $5,000? You know, what cars and printers do we have and stuff like that. So it's very much in progress. And I will submit that to Sarah Stolt today. And I can certainly send out the draft copy at the end of the day when I put my dot my final I's and cross my final T's. I'm happy to share that, but just know that it's in a, it's not very pretty. But it's coming along. It is coming along, and it's not as complicated as I had kind of feared it to be. So.
Pearl, this is Rick. I think that'd be appropriate if you're able to share that.
Yeah.
With when you feel, you know, it's in the form you are comfortable with.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take me a long time to have it finalized. It was just a matter of, because the state didn't provide me really as a new director with any really targeted guidance around that, I had to rely on my own investigative process and my peers to really support me. And they've done a wonderful job helping me. And I do feel confident in the document that I've put together. It just has gaps in it because I've had to figure out that I need to go to Mike to ask for these financial documents, and I need to go to this person to find a policy. And so it's been a little bit of an investigative process for me as well, which is good because then I've continued to learn who holds what process or.
And the follow-up question, I think maybe what Dwayne was also asking about was, is this an executive director document or is this a zone board document? And if it's a zone board document, it should be coming to the board for final approval before the final goes out.
Oh, yeah, and the state has said that none of these will be finalized without their zone boards approving.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, I will share that document, maybe when it's just in a little bit more comprehensive form, so you have the appropriate attachments and things.
Yep.
Are there other questions related to the narrative or to the not statistical, but the numerical data that was sent out?
I have a question, and that is there a current job description for CHIP?
There is not. CHIP is currently backfilling the vacant Vulnerable Adult Protective Services job that was vacated by Sharon Kleeman. Sharon Kleeman. I can't remember her name. I didn't meet her. So he has been in that position. I have spoken with the state about state HR, what's appropriate to do in terms of finding him a permanent role. There hasn't been a final decision. I had a preliminary conversation some weeks ago, and so I need to have a follow-up with Sarah Stolt and with state HR to understand really what I can do, essentially, or what can be done. That the state made a commitment to not just cut people out, but then where is an appropriate fit and what that looks like within Cass County. And then really whether Mr. Ammerman would accept a different position or he would potentially choose to leave the organization. So yes, actively working on that. Other questions?
This is Brian. I got a quick question. Anything major that you're seeing in additional services and that as a result of the COVID-19 and stuff like that? I know I looked at the numbers, but any area that's causing you concern or, some angst as we move forward?
No, and I went through numbers again today with my department managers, and specifically around economic assistance was where I was worried because we had anticipated, these huge numbers. And so Sydney and I were able to say about why we're seeing basically almost a consistent pattern of there's nothing that's exceptionally low or exceptionally high, and we would have anticipated to see that in the month of April because the COVID was really kind of prevalent in our community starting the middle of March. So we had the full month of April. And really, if you look at those numbers, we had an increase in TANF grants, and that was, plus 21. And we talk about those because they're specifically complicated. TANF in and of itself as a program is a complicated program to manage. And then the next number that was of note is right below that, and that's food stamps. And so we had an additional 449 recipients of food stamps But other than that, the numbers stayed pretty consistent with what they'd been in previous months, or fairly in line with our existing benchmarks. And so Sydney and I talked about what that might be. And obviously some of this is speculation, but I think it really lays around that $600 that individuals are getting weekly in addition to their unemployment. And if that was enough of a financial bump for some of these families who had lost some income, that either one, they wouldn't have then qualified for additional services that we provide through economic assistance, or if it was enough to keep them afloat and so they weren't then willing to go down and have to do all these application processes for assistance. And that was the one kind of thing that we had just said, we think that that's it, but there's, again, some of that is speculation. So, and then the other number is just the number of applications received. And that just is really the way that the applications are coming to us. And I think the reason why those are tracked is that there is a struggle, I think, with some of these electronic applications. Maybe not, they don't have required boxes, and so you can't tell if someone skipped a box intentionally, if they meant no and that's why they skipped it, if they inadvertently skipped it. And so I think it is more complicated to get an electronic application because you potentially have to do additional information seeking to make sure all of the information is actually there than you would if you did a paper application or you did an in-person interview. And so Sydney does like to keep track of those. And obviously there's been a huge encouragement of individuals to use these electronic processes, not only from us as a zone, but from the state, and making sure those are accessible. And links to those electronic applications exist on the county's website under economic assistance. And so people have been utilizing it, but I think it does just present a challenge of additional information gathering on the part of our eligibility workers. Pardon me. So that's a number that's tracked as well. And you can see that it just continues to go up and up. So I guess, long story short, to answer your question, there is currently nothing that is exceptionally out of the usual.
Thank you.
Yes. So Commissioner Pollock, you had asked about the economic impact of things at our last meeting when I had asked what kind of information that people would like. And Sydney did include some of that stuff, but he did note too that some of the information around some of the numbers that he's provided in the past, he's not been able to get those reports. And so the absence of some of the numbers that you're used to seeing on this narrative or numerical report aren't there simply because he can't get them right now, but we would be happy to include them in the future. And he's followed up with contacts at the state to see if we can get those numbers so we can better understand that economic impact in which you were interested.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any additional questions?
Pearl, this is Robert. I just have a comment that I'm going to throw out there, and for you or anybody else to respond as you may wish. I guess I'm just kind of wondering as I listen to this discussion is what, based on what you've heard and the conversation you've had, what does this board want the composition of the zone board to look like moving forward? I think at some point that probably needs to be answered, and if there's a desire to do something different, a path forward. I think we've had some input that the vision in the crafting of the legislation was that the board would look different than county human service boards looked. Clearly, we've got a lot of very dedicated people on this board who have followed county human services and now zone services for a long time, and that dedication is appreciated and is a value. But is the zone board moving forward going to look the same as the county human service zone, or as the county social service board, or is it going to look different? And if it's going to look different, what is the pathway forward for that? Again, I'm not a member of the board, but I have conversations with each of you, and I have conversations with legislators. So I'm not trying to steer that one way or the other, but I think that is at this point that's a rather fundamental question that probably should be acknowledged one way or the other.
Madam Chair and Pearl, this is Rick, and Robert, this is Rick. I was thinking about that, and I tuned in a little bit late in the conversation because of some technical difficulties here, but I got on and I was thinking about this, and I read through the other entities, the other zones makeup, and like Commissioner Breitling, I noted that the Burleigh County Board is very similar to ours, and so thinking about what's expected, and that's why I asked Robert about what your communication was with the senators and what they kind of shared with you, and I would kind of be along the same lines as them. I think the commissioners on the board obviously are important, and I'll get back to that. I think community partners would be more significant contributors to the board than perhaps single purpose users. I don't know, whatever word you want to refer to that, because I know our applicants that we have, I think two are both, I'll call them users versus community members. One's kind of a mix, but I like the community partners piece, and I also think a couple of legislators on the board would be great. When it comes back to the commissioners, I'm just throwing this out. I have no more authority than anybody else on this, but I'm thinking at least 3 county commissioners should be on it. But I think if you have the other commissioners are interested, then I think they should be on the board as well. But I'm not sure it should be a requirement that we have 5 county commissioners, but I don't think it's a restriction either that if all 5 county commissioners think this is something they want to be involved with, and I think then all 5 county commissioners should be included. I think we've got 2 long-standing community members who I would wholly expect and appreciate if they were to remain on the zone board. And without changing that, but we've talked about how big do we want to get. So those are my thoughts. It's kind of a rambling, but I don't think we should limit the number of county commissioners. But I think we should have a minimum number, and I do think that we need to have community partners versus single users out there. One opinion.
Anybody else have any initial thoughts about composition that they want to share for consideration?
Sure. Just a question, probably more so, and maybe already answered this, but when we originally talked about this, we did talk about legislators being engaged, and I know in the past Judy had kind of indicated that maybe that wasn't the best route because they're already highly engaged. And so we also talked about other area legislators that maybe aren't highly engaged. I mean, this is a state organization now, and we want to make sure that we have really great communication going in that direction. So I would agree with Rick that I think some legislators would be a good thing. And I don't know that we need 5 commissioners, but 3 probably at least. I don't know. We have other boards that, the diversion, we've got 3 board members on. I think it's, at least for right now, I wouldn't want to pull back too much on county commissioners. I think down the road, when we reevaluate this, after this is all done being rolled out and everything's clicking along, then maybe, that would be okay to relook at it. But I'd like to see a legislator or two on here.
Okay.
And I've often thought that somebody from Lutheran Social Services might be of value, or someone from the from our New American community, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Oh,
Wayne, good.
Sorry about that. I was just suggesting that perhaps what we could do prior to our next meeting is each of us take a look at who we would recommend to be on the committee and forward that to you so that you could send it out to all of us. And that way we could look at it for the next meeting. I'm sure we each have ideas of who would best serve on such a board as this. And rather than discuss it and throw ideas during the short time we have here, perhaps it'd be good to put it down on paper.
Yeah, I would appreciate that very much. I think if we talk about too, less of having this application process and more being strategic and recruiting people, the input that you guys will share in terms of your ideas and people within your social network that are really dedicated to human services and serve people in the community in various capacities would be really beneficial. So I'll send up a follow-up email to this group requesting that. That's a very good idea. Thank you.
If I may, if the idea is to coordinate the delivery of services, we might want to just take a look at it from that standpoint. And if that's the case, you could have Andy from the jail engaged. There's a lot of different folks that you could look at and see how we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's why it will be important to not only have our existing board, but to be good about soliciting feedback from community guests or involving people that can talk about the issues that are really pertinent to them that they're facing, or seek out information from our other partners. Just knowing that 15 is the max this board can have anyways, and probably getting up to 15, there's a point of diminishing returns, I'm sure, when we talk about how many board members we have, and then our agility, the agility of the board when it has that many members. So. Any other additional feedback, comments, either about the zone board moving forward or about our operations reports? Really anything else for the good of the meeting?
This is Robert. I really like that idea of you getting some feedback from each board member of who they think should be represented or members of the board moving forward, because one of my takeaways through this whole process is that that there is it is a different process that's in place, and that in some ways it's easier to reflect that and understand that if it's very visual, that there are different and that can be different or additional members who are part of that board and having that conversation. So I appreciate the discussion, because I wasn't, prior to about 10 minutes ago, I wasn't quite sure how we were going to move this forward.
Hey, I'll talk things over until it's fall over, so that's fine by me. Well, any further comments? Okay, do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.